The Quarry Beneath San Isidro Chapter 1. Exposition. The Job. 00:00. San Isidro, Durango, 1978. The sun hung low over the cracked earth, painting the horizon in shades of rust and amber. I'm Elena Morales, a land surveyor, 32 years old, born and raised in this dusty corner of Mexico. Most of my days are spent mapping forgotten plots for developers who dream of factories or housing projects that rarely materialize. Today was no different. My latest assignment was an abandoned quarry on the edge of town, a place locals avoided, whispering about bad luck and old stories no one could quite pin down. 00:25. The quarry sat beyond a stretch of brittle mesquite and cacti, its jagged rim barely visible from the road. My truck rattled along the dirt path, kicking up clouds of red dust that clung to my boots and the hem of my jeans. The client, some out-of-state company, wanted a full survey before they'd commit to filling the site for a new textile plant. Standard job: check boundaries, assess soil stability, scan for subsurface hazards. I parked at the quarry's edge, grabbed my gear, total station, theodolite, a battered notebook, and stepped into the heat. 00:50. The air smelled of dry stone and something faintly sour, like rotting fruit left too long in the sun. The quarry was a scar in the earth, its walls plunging deep into shadow. I set up my equipment methodically, the way I always did. Precision was my religion. A single miscalculation could bury a project, or worse, someone building on it. I worked alone, as usual, my only company the hum of cicadas and the occasional hawk circling overhead. 01:15. The first hour passed quietly. I marked coordinates, noted elevations, and sketched the quarry's outline. Everything was routine until my compass started twitching. Just a few degrees off, but enough to make me pause. I recalibrated, checked again. The needle jittered, refusing to settle. I blamed the heat, the iron in the rocks, anything to explain the noise in my data. I didn't like inconsistencies. They gnawed at me, like a splinter I couldn't pull out. Chapter 2. Rising Action. The Anomaly. 01:40. By noon, the sun was relentless, baking the quarry floor. I'd finished the boundary checks and moved to the center, where the ground dipped into a shallow basin. That's when I saw it. Something that hadn't been there when I scouted the site an hour earlier. A concrete structure, no taller than a man, squatting in the dust like it had always belonged. It looked like the entrance to a storm cellar, two slanted metal doors set into a low slab, with a rusted padlock dangling from a chain. 02:05. I circled it slowly, boots crunching on loose gravel. No tire tracks, no footprints, no sign of construction. The slab was smooth, unweathered, as if poured yesterday, but the surrounding earth was undisturbed. I checked my site plans again, flipping through dog-eared pages. Nothing. No record of a cellar, no utilities, no prior development. Just an old quarry, abandoned since the 1940s when the stone ran dry. 02:30. I should have walked away, noted the anomaly, and called it a day. But something about the doors pulled at me. They didn't belong, and I couldn't let that go. I knelt, inspecting the padlock. It was heavy, cold, the kind you'd find on an old hacienda gate. The chain was loose, almost decorative, like it was daring me to try it. I tugged. It gave way with a soft click, the lock falling open as if it had never been secured. 02:55. The doors creaked as I pulled them apart, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. The air that rose from below was cool, damp, smelling of wet stone and something metallic. I grabbed my flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom. The stairs were concrete, worn but intact, spiraling down into the earth. My job was to report hazards, and this was a hazard if I'd ever seen one. I told myself I'd take a quick look, just enough to confirm it was an old storage vault or mining tunnel. Chapter 3. Rising Action. The Descent. 03:20. The stairs were steeper than they looked, each step echoing in a narrow shaft. My flashlight caught glints of moisture on the walls, the concrete slick with condensation. 10 steps down, I noticed the air growing heavier, pressing against my chest. The silence was absolute, broken only by my breathing and the faint drip of water somewhere below. I counted 20 steps, then 30. The shaft shouldn't have been this deep. The quarry wasn't that far below the surface. 03:45. At the bottom, the stairs opened into a corridor, wide and low, lined with cinder block walls. My flashlight swept across faded paint, peeling in curls like dead skin. A metal door stood at the far end, its surface pitted with rust but otherwise unmarked. No signs, no labels, just a single handle, cold to the touch. I hesitated, my hand hovering. This wasn't on any map. No one had mentioned underground structures. But I'd come this far. 04:10. The door opened with a groan, revealing a room that didn't belong. It was an office, or something like one. Rows of metal desks, filing cabinets, a rotary phone sitting on a cracked countertop. The air smelled of old paper and stale coffee. A calendar hung on the wall, pinned to 1963, its edges yellowed but the ink still sharp. I stepped inside, my boots leaving prints in a thin layer of dust. The silence felt heavier here, like it was watching me. 04:35. I checked the desks. Papers littered them, forms in Spanish, typed with the kind of precision that screamed bureaucracy. Work orders, supply requisitions, maintenance logs for something called Sublevel 1. No company name, no letterhead. One memo stood out, pinned to a corkboard. No unauthorized access beyond Sublevel 2. All personnel must report findings to control. The word control was underlined twice, in red ink that hadn't faded. Chapter 4. Rising Action, Sublevel 2. 05:00. I found the next door at the back of the office, half hidden behind a rusted cabinet. It was heavier than the first, reinforced with steel, and opened onto another staircase, this one descending into deeper shadow. My compass was useless now, spinning wildly in my hand. I should have turned back, but the thought of leaving without answers felt worse than the unease creeping up my spine. I descended, counting steps again. 05:25. The second sublevel was different. The air was humid, thick with the scent of mildew and something sweeter, like overripe mangoes. The corridor stretched longer than the first, its walls lined with cracked tiles that gleamed under my flashlight. Doors branched off at irregular intervals, each marked with numbers that didn't follow a pattern. 7, 23, 2, 15. I picked one at random, 23, and pushed it open. 05:50. Inside was a kitchen, the kind you'd find in a small cantina. A gas stove, a sink filled with cloudy water, a table set for four with plates of food that looked untouched. The smell hit me. Tortillas, beans, a faint trace of chili, but wrong, like it had sat too long. A radio sat in the corner, its dial glowing faintly, though no sound came from it. I checked the plates. The food was warm, steam curling faintly in the beam of my flashlight. No one was here. No one could have been here. 06:15. I backed out, my heart thudding. The next door, number 2, opened into a bedroom. A single bed, neatly made, with a woven blanket in bright reds and yellows. A nightstand held a framed photo of a family, 2 parents, a young girl, smiling in a way that didn't reach their eyes. The faces looked familiar, like I'd seen them in passing, maybe in San Isidro's market. But the longer I stared, the less certain I was. Their features seemed to shift, eyes widening, smiles stretching too thin. I set the photo down and left. Chapter 5. Rising Action, Sublevel 3. 06:40. The stairs to Sublevel 3 were different. Wooden, creaking under my weight, as if they hadn't been used in decades. The air grew colder, carrying a faint antiseptic tang. My flashlight flickered, its beam narrowing. I tightened my grip, refusing to let panic take hold. The corridor below was tiled in pale green, like a hospital ward. Gurneys lined the walls, some draped with stained sheets .07:05. I moved slowly, my boots echoing in the empty space. A door at the end of the hall was marked Clinica. Inside was an operating room, its steel table gleaming under a single overhead lamp. Trays of surgical tools, scalpels, forceps, a bone saw, were arranged with unsettling precision. A clipboard hung from the table, its pages filled with handwritten notes. Patient 47, procedure incomplete. Sublevel 4 required for stabilization. The date was yesterday .07:30. Something moved in the corner, a faint rustle behind a curtain. I froze, my flashlight sweeping across the fabric. The shadow behind it was wrong, too tall, too thin, its edges blurring like smoke. The lamp overhead flickered, casting the room in staccato bursts of light and dark. I backed toward the door, my pulse hammering. The curtain rippled again, and I ran, slamming the door behind me .07:55. The corridor seemed longer now, the walls closer. I found the stairs to the next level, my hands shaking as I gripped the railing. I didn't want to go deeper, but the door to sublevel 2 was gone. The only way was down. I descended, the air growing thicker, the antiseptic smell giving way to something sour and organic. Chapter 6. Climax, Sublevel 4, 08:20. Sublevel 4 was a market, or something that wanted to be one. Stalls lined a wide hall, their wooden frames sagging under faded awnings. The air was heavy with the smell of rotting produce and damp earth. Baskets held fruit that looked real until I touched it. Papayas that crumbled to dust, limes that oozed black liquid. My flashlight caught movement at the edges, shapes that darted between stalls, too quick to follow .08:45. The stalls were manned by mannequins, their faces blank but angled toward me. Some held knives, others clutched baskets, their plastic hands stained with something dark. I moved faster, my boots splashing in shallow puddles that hadn't been there moments before. The water was warm, viscous, clinging to my ankles. I glanced down and saw my reflection, not mine, but hers, the girl from the photo, her eyes wide and unblinking beneath the surface .09:10. The water rose, lapping at my knees. The mannequins shifted, their heads turning as I passed. One reached out, its fingers brushing my arm, cold and unyielding. I yanked free, stumbling toward a door at the far end. It was metal, marked with a single word, Bajo. Below, the water surged, pulling at my legs. I threw myself through the door, slamming it shut as something heavy thudded against it from the other side. Chapter 7. Climax, Sublevel 5, 09:35. The next level was a church, its pews arranged in perfect rows, the air thick with incense and wax. A wooden cross hung above an altar, its surface carved with symbols I didn't recognize. Candles burned low, their flames flickering without wind. I moved down the aisle, my flashlight catching glints of stained glass that showed no light beyond. The scenes depicted were wrong. Figures with too many limbs, faces that melted into one another .10:00. A hymn played faintly, the notes distorted, like a record left spinning too long. I reached the altar and found a book, its pages brittle and stained. The text was in Spanish, but the words didn't make sense, shifting as I tried to read them. You are expected. Sublevel 6 awaits. The air grew colder, the candles guttering. Something moved behind the altar, a shadow that didn't match the light .10:25. I ran, my boots slipping on the polished floor. The door to the next level was already open, the stairs descending into darkness. I didn't want to go, but the hymn grew louder, the air heavier, pressing me forward. I stepped onto the stairs, the door closing behind me with a finality that made my stomach lurch. Chapter 8. Falling Action, Sublevel 6. 10:50. Sublevel 6 was a factory, its machinery silent but warm, as if it had just stopped running. Conveyor belts stretched into the distance, piled with objects I couldn't identify, shapes that looked like tools but twisted in ways that hurt to look at. The air smelled of oil and burnt metal. My flashlight flickered again, its beam barely reaching the walls. 11:15. I found a control room, its panels covered in dials and switches, none labeled. A logbook lay open, its entries dated back decades, listing production quotas for something called units. The last entry was from today, written in my handwriting, though I hadn't touched it. Unit 47 complete. Delivery to Sublevel 7 pending. My hands shook as I set it down. 11:40. The machinery hummed to life, the belts jerking forward. Something moved in the shadows, tall and thin, its limbs too long for its body. It didn't approach, just watched, its head tilting as if studying me. I backed away, finding a service ladder tucked into a corner. It led down, the rungs cold and slick. I climbed, my breath ragged, the sound of the machinery fading as I descended. Chapter 9. Falling Action, Sublevel 7. 12:05. The final level was a cavern, vast and unfinished, its walls raw stone veined with something that glowed faintly blue. Scaffolding leaned at impossible angles, some collapsed into piles of twisted metal. The air was heavy, tasting of salt and decay. My flashlight was useless now, its beam swallowed by the dark. The only light came from the glowing veins, pulsing like a heartbeat. 12:30. I found blueprints scattered across the floor, their designs impossible. Tunnels that looped into themselves, chambers with no entrances, a pit labeled containment. One sheet bore my name, written in red ink. Elena Morales, Sublevel 7, Observer. I dropped it, my heart pounding. The cavern wasn't empty. Footsteps echoed, slow and deliberate, circling me. 12:55. I ran, dodging rebar and broken concrete, until I found a small elevator, its doors rusted but open. A single button inside was marked Surface. I pressed it, the doors closing as something scraped against the stone outside. The elevator lurched upward, the sound of grinding metal filling the air. I didn't breathe until it stopped. Chapter 10. Resolution. The Return. 13:20. The doors opened onto the quarry, the sun lower now, casting long shadows across the dust. The air was warm, familiar, but wrong, like it had been drained of life. My truck waited where I'd left it, untouched. The concrete structure was gone, the ground smooth as if it had never existed. I stood there, my hands trembling, my notebook empty. 13:45. I climbed into the truck, the engine sputtering to life. The quarry stretched out behind me, silent and ordinary. I drove, not looking back, the road blurring through tears I hadn't realized were falling. My notebook stayed blank. I couldn't write what I'd seen, couldn't explain it to myself, let alone anyone else. 14:10. As I reached the edge of San Isidro, I heard it, a faint hum, like machinery stirring beneath the earth. I gripped the wheel, my knuckles white, and kept driving. The sound faded, but the weight in my chest didn't. I knew it wasn't over. The quarry was still there, waiting, and something told me it would call me back. The quarry beneath San Isidro. Conclusion. 14:35. The road back to San Isidro stretched out like a ribbon of dust, winding through the mesquite and cacti that clawed at the edges of the horizon. My hands gripped the steering wheel, the leather worn smooth under my palms, but I could still feel the tremor in my fingers, a faint vibration that hadn't stopped since I'd climbed out of that elevator. The truck's engine growled, a familiar sound, but it felt distant, like it belonged to someone else's life. The quarry was behind me now, its jagged rim swallowed by the heat haze, but I couldn't shake the sense that it was still watching. The air inside the cab was thick, smelling of sweat and the faint metallic tang that clung to my clothes, a reminder of the depths I'd left behind. My notebook lay on the passenger seat, its pages blank, mocking me with their emptiness. I hadn't written a single word, couldn't bring myself to. How do you document something that shouldn't exist? 14:50. San Isidro came into view, a scatter of low buildings baked under the Durango sun. The town hadn't changed in the hours I'd been gone. Same faded signs for cervezas and tortoise, same old men sitting under the shade of a jacaranda tree, fanning themselves with rolled-up newspapers. But it looked wrong, like a photograph left too long in the sun, the colors bleeding into something less real. I parked outside my small house on Calle de las Flores, a one-story adobe with peeling paint and a sagging roof. The key trembled in my hand as I unlocked the door, the familiar creak of the hinges sounding louder than it should have. Inside, the air was still, heavy with the smell of dust and the faint lavender of the soap I kept by the sink. I dropped my gear bag by the door, not bothering to unpack the theodolite or total station. They felt tainted, like they'd carried something back with them. 15:10. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the chipped ceramic mug on the counter. It was the one I used every morning, the one my mother had given me before she passed, its handle worn from years of use. I filled it with water from the tap, the liquid cold against my lips, but it tasted wrong, metallic, like the air in the quarry's depths. I set it down, untouched, and moved to the living room, where a small wooden cross hung above the doorway. My grandmother's, another relic of a family that had dwindled to just me. I'd never been religious, not in the way San Isidro expected, but I found myself staring at it, willing it to mean something, to anchor me to the world I thought I knew. It didn't. The cross looked ordinary, but its shadow on the wall seemed to stretch too far, its edges blurring into shapes I couldn't name. 15:35. I sat on the couch, the springs creaking under my weight, and tried to piece together what had happened. The quarry was supposed to be a routine job, a few hours of measurements and notes, nothing more. But the concrete structure, the stairs, the levels, each one more impossible than the last, had unraveled something in me. The office with its yellowed calendar, the kitchen with its warm food, the hospital room with its shadowed figure, the market with its mannequins, the church with its warped hymns, the factory with its impossible blueprints, the cavern with its glowing veins. They weren't just places. They were pieces of a machine, a system designed to pull me deeper, to show me things I wasn't meant to see. I closed my eyes, trying to shut out the images, but they clung to the backs of my eyelids, sharp and relentless. 16:00. The phone rang, a shrill sound that cut through the silence. I flinched, my heart lurching. It was the old rotary phone on the side table, its cord tangled from years of neglect. I hadn't used it in weeks. Most of my clients called the office in Durango, not my home. I let it ring, counting each tone, waiting for it to stop. It didn't. On the 10th ring, I picked it up, the receiver heavy in my hand. Static crackled on the other end, a low hum that reminded me of the elevator's machinery. Elena Morales? A voice asked, male, clipped, unfamiliar. I didn't answer, my throat tight. You were at the quarry today, it said, not a question. You saw it. The line went dead before I could respond, the static replaced by silence. I set the receiver down, my hand shaking. 16:25. I checked the locks on the door, the windows, even the back gate leading to the small yard where I grew tomatoes and chiles. Everything was secure, but it didn't feel like enough. I pulled the curtains shut, blocking out the fading light, and sat back down, my notebook in my lap. I opened it, pen in hand, but the blank pages stared back, daring me to write. I tried to start with something simple. Quarry survey, San Isidro, July 12, 1978. Anomaly detected, but my hand froze. Anomaly wasn't the right word. It wasn't a mistake or a glitch. It was deliberate, designed, a trap I'd walked into because I couldn't leave questions unanswered. Point 16:50. The hum came again, faint at first, like a distant engine. I thought it was the refrigerator at first, or maybe a neighbor's truck idling outside. But it grew louder, a steady pulse that seemed to come from beneath the floor. I stood, my boots heavy on the tile, and followed the sound. It was strongest in the kitchen, near the sink. I knelt, pressing my ear to the floor, the tiles cold against my cheek. The hum was there, unmistakable, the same mechanical drone I'd heard in the elevator. I pulled back, my breath catching. The floor was solid, no trapdoors, no seams, but the sound was real, vibrating through the house like a heartbeat. Point 17:15. I grabbed my flashlight and went outside, the evening air cool against my skin. The yard was quiet, the tomato plants sagging under their own weight. I checked the ground, looking for cracks, for anything that could explain the sound. Nothing. Just dirt and the faint outline of my own footprints from days ago. I went back inside, locking the door behind me, and sat at the kitchen table. The hum had stopped, but the silence was worse, heavy with the weight of something waiting. I opened my notebook again, forcing myself to write. Concrete structure, unmarked. Stairs to multiple sublevels. Inconsistent with site records. The words felt inadequate, but they were all I had. Point 17:40. Night fell, the darkness pressing against the windows. I hadn't turned on the lights, hadn't wanted to see my reflection in the glass. I kept the flashlight on, its beam a small comfort in the dim room. My thoughts kept circling back to the quarry, to the levels, to the way each one had felt like a piece of my own life twisted into something wrong. The office had reminded me of my first job in Durango, pushing papers for a construction firm. The kitchen was like the one in my childhood home, where my mother cooked tamales every Sunday. The church echoed the one I'd been dragged to as a girl, its pews hard against my back. Was it coincidence, or had the quarry known me, shaped itself to pull me in? 18:05. I heard it again. The hum, louder now, unmistakable. It came from the hallway, where the cross hung above the door. I stood, my flashlight shaking in my hand, and moved toward it. The cross was still there, but it looked different, the wood darker, the carvings deeper. I reached out, my fingers brushing the surface, and it was cold, colder than it should have been. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the wall, and I stepped back, my heart pounding. The cross wasn't just a cross anymore. Its shadow stretched across the floor, forming shapes that didn't belong, angles that twisted, lines that looped into themselves. Point 18:30. I grabbed my keys and left, the door slamming behind me. The streets of San Isidro were quiet, the town asleep under a sky heavy with stars. I drove without thinking, the truck's headlights cutting through the dark. I didn't know where I was going until I saw the quarry's edge, its rim a black silhouette against the night. I stopped the truck, the engine idling, and stared into the darkness. The concrete structure was gone, just as it had been when I left, but the air felt wrong, heavy with the same metallic tang. I turned off the engine and sat there, the silence pressing in. Point 18:55. I don't know how long I stayed, but the hum found me again, faint at first, then louder, coming from the quarry itself. I stepped out, my boots crunching on the gravel, and walked to the edge. The beam of my flashlight swept across the ground, finding nothing but dirt and stone. But the hum was there, steady, pulling me closer. I knelt, pressing my hand to the earth. It was warm, too warm, like something alive pulsed beneath it. I pulled back, my fingers stained with red dust, and stood, the quarry stretching out before me like a mouth waiting to swallow me whole. Point 19:20. I drove back to town, the hum fading as I left the quarry behind. But it followed me in other ways. The streetlights flickered as I passed, their glow dimming and brightening in a rhythm that matched the pulse in my chest. The signs for the cantina and the mercado seemed to shift, their letters blurring into words I couldn't read. I parked outside my house, the engine ticking as it cooled, and sat there, unwilling to go inside. The cross, the hum, the quarry, they were all connected, pieces of something I couldn't name but couldn't escape. Point 19:45. I forced myself back inside. The house darker now, the air thicker. The cross was still there, its shadow normal again, but I didn't trust it. I sat at the kitchen table, my notebook open, and wrote what I could. Sublevel 1, office, outdated records. Sublevel 2, kitchen, food untouched but warm. Sublevel 3, hospital, surgical tools, shadow. Sublevel 4, market, mannequins, rising water. Sublevel 5, church, warped hymns. Sublevel 6, factory, impossible blueprints. Sublevel 7, cavern, glowing veins, my name. The words spilled out, fragmented, but they were proof, something to hold on to. Point 20:10. The phone rang again, the sound sharper this time, like a knife cutting through the silence. I didn't answer, let it ring until it stopped. But it didn't stop. The ringing grew louder, joined by the hum, both sounds weaving together until they filled the house. I grabbed the receiver, my voice shaking. "Who is this?" I demanded. The same voice answered, calm, unhurried. "You left something behind, Elena. It's waiting." The line went dead, and the hum stopped, leaving only my breathing in the dark. Point 20:35. I couldn't stay in the house. I grabbed my notebook, my flashlight, and a small knife I kept in the kitchen drawer, its blade dull but better than nothing. I drove to the church, the one in the center of San Isidro, its bell tower a shadow against the stars. The doors were unlocked, the pews empty. I sat in the back, the wood creaking under me, and waited for what I didn't know. The air smelled of wax and old books, familiar but wrong, like everything else tonight. The cross above the altar was larger than the one in my house, its carving simpler, but it felt the same. Watching, waiting. Point 21:00. I opened my notebook, reading the words I'd written, trying to make sense of them. The quarry wasn't just a place. It was a process, a machine that had taken me apart and put me back together wrong. The levels weren't random. They were mirrors, reflections of my life, my fears, my memories, twisted into something else. The office was my past, the kitchen my childhood, the church my guilt for abandoning the faith my grandmother held so dear. The market, the hospital, the factory, the cavern, they were pieces of me, reshaped to fit something else's design. Point 21:25. The hum returned, faint but growing, coming from beneath the church. I stood, my flashlight sweeping across the pews, the beam catching glints of dust in the air. The sound was stronger near the altar, where a small door led to the sacristy. I pushed it open, the hinges groaning, and found a staircase descending into darkness. It shouldn't have been there. The church had no basement, no sublevels, not according to any plan I'd ever seen. But the hum was unmistakable, the same as the quarries, pulling me down. Point 21:50. I descended, the stairs narrow and worn, the air growing colder with each step. My flashlight flickered, its beam thinning, but I kept going, the knife clutched in my other hand. The stairs ended in a small room, its walls concrete, unmarked except for a single metal door. It was identical to the one in the quarry, rusted but solid, with a handle that felt too cold. I opened it, the hum now a roar in my ears, and stepped into a space that shouldn't exist. Point 22:15. It was the office from sublevel 1, but different. Older, the desks rusted through, the papers crumbled to dust. The calendar was gone, replaced by a blank wall that seemed to pulse with the same blue glow I'd seen in the cavern. I moved through the room, my boots leaving no prints this time, the floor clean but wrong, like it was waiting for me to disturb it. Another door led to the kitchen from sublevel 2, the plates still set, the food still warm, But the air was stale, the smell of chili sharper, almost choking. 22:40. I kept moving, through the hospital, the market, the church, the factory, each level appearing in fragments, overlapping in ways that made my head ache. The mannequins were there, their faces now resembling people I knew: my mother, my grandmother, the girl from the photo. Their eyes followed me, unblinking, their hands reaching but never touching. The blueprints in the factory were clearer now, each one labeled with my name, my life, my fears, drawn in lines that twisted into spirals. 23:05. The cavern was the last, its glowing veins brighter, pulsing faster. The blueprints were scattered across the floor, but they weren't blueprints anymore. They were pages from my notebook, filled with my handwriting, detailing every moment of my life. My first survey job, my mother's death, the nights I'd spent alone in this house, wondering if I'd ever leave San Isidro. At the center of the cavern was a chair, bolted to the floor, its surface worn but clean. I didn't sit, didn't dare, but I felt its pull, like it was meant for me. 23:30. The hum stopped, the silence absolute. I stood there, my flashlight dead, the knife useless in my hand. The air was thick, pressing against my chest, and I knew I wasn't alone. The shadow was there, the one from the hospital, tall and thin, its edges blurring into the dark. It didn't move, didn't speak, but I felt its weight, its intent. It wasn't a person, wasn't a thing, but something else, something that had built this place, that had called me here. 23:55. I backed toward the elevator, the one that had brought me to the surface, its doors open, the button for superficie glowing faintly. I stepped inside, pressing it, the doors closing with a groan. The car lurched upward, the sound of grinding metal filling the air, but it felt different this time, slower, like it was reluctant to let me go. I closed my eyes, willing myself to stay calm, to believe I'd make it out. 00:20. The doors opened, and I stepped out, expecting the quarry, the dust, the stars. But I was in my house, standing in the hallway, the cross above the door casting its shadow across the floor. The air was still, the hum gone, but the weight in my chest remained. I walked to the kitchen, my boots leaving no sound, and saw my notebook on the table, open to a page I hadn't written. "You are expected. Return to the quarry." The words were in my handwriting, the ink still wet. 00:45. I left the house, the town, driving past the quarry without stopping. The hum was there, faint but persistent, following me down the road. San Isidro shrank in my rearview mirror, its lights fading into the dark. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay. The quarry wasn't just a place. It was a part of me now, its levels carved into my mind, its shadow stretching across every choice I'd make. I drove, the road endless, the hum a constant companion, and I knew, deep down, that it would call me back.